So this video is for our Evenstar participants. I'm going to put together a little bit of a video about blocking. So hopefully by now you have completed the graft on your shawl, and that means on the shawl border you are all done. However, your shawl when you finish is not going to look like this one because it hasn't been blocked yet. It's probably going to resemble a pile of limp spaghetti when you finish, and that's exactly what it's supposed to look like. What we need to do now is block the fabric to stretch it out and open up all of this beautiful lace work that you've worked so hard on the last several months. So let's have a little bit of a talk about blocking. There's really nothing necessarily any different about blocking this shawl if you've blocked any of your knits before, but the process of blocking basically means you're going to give your finished object a bath, and then you are going to stretch it out and pin it into shape and allow it to dry. Because wool has memory, what we're trying to do is make the wool or the wool blend yarn that you've done your project with remember this shape, this nice open airy shape, and stay that way. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to fill some kind of a basin or a container or a sink or your bathtub with some tepid water, cool water. You don't want it to be screaming hot, obviously, but it doesn't have to be ice cold either. Just kind of something cool, room temperature water. You are going to want to use a no rinse wool wash product. Obviously, if it doesn't have to be rinsed, that eliminates a step for you. We have two brands that we sell at the shop, Eucalyptus and Soak, but there's others out there. Whatever it is that you like to use for your finished objects, a cap full of this in the water. You're going to put your shawl in the water, and then you're going to want to make sure you let it soak for a good amount of time. I think sometimes what happens if people go to block items is they put it in the water for like 2-3 minutes and then take it out. And what you have to remember is that wool can absorb up to 3 times its own weight in water, and it's also hydrophobic. This is why fishermen's sweaters are made out of 100% wool, because it repels water. So in order to allow the water to soak through the wool fibers completely, which is what you need to do, especially on a project like this, where we're really going to have to stretch it out, you need to give it some time. 15-20 minutes at least. It doesn't need to soak all day by any stretch of the imagination, but definitely at least give it a good 15-20 minutes. The general rule of thumb is a lot of times the finished object will kind of sink lower in the water. When you first put it in, it's going to want to kind of float on the top, and as it absorbs the water, it'll go down. It doesn't have to go all the way to the bottom of your basin, but it won't be sitting right there on the top on the surface anymore once it's absorbed a good amount of water. Then you're going to want to take it out of the water, and what you want to make sure, as always, when you're blocking something is don't grab the shawl by one end and pull it up like this, because it's going to stretch. The weight of the water-soaked wool or yarn is going to stretch, but it's going to stretch in a way you don't want. We want to control the stretch, right? So when you take it out of the basin, out of the water, you want to get your hands underneath of it and pick it up this way. And that's for all blocking. Anytime you block anything, a hat, a sweater, anything, you always want to kind of come from underneath. You don't want to grab an end and pull it out that way. You're going to want to squeeze the excess water out. Don't ever wring knitted fabric. You want to squeeze the excess water out. And then what you're going to want to do is take your shawl and lay it on a towel and roll it up in a towel. Beach towels are great because they're big and absorbent, but you're going to want to lay it out in a towel and roll up the towel and squeeze it again. The idea is you want this item to be damp when you go to block it, but you don't want it to be soaking wet. It's just going to take a long time for it to dry, and it'll be frustrating for you. So the goal is just to get it damp. You don't need to have it be dripping wet. And then what you're going to need to find is a place where you can have plenty of room to block. This shawl is intended to be about 60 inches in diameter. You can do it if you have a clean patch of carpet, like in a room, a spare room that you're not using. That's great because you can pin your shawl to the carpet and stretch it out and leave it. If you have like maybe a guest room bed that you're not using all the time, that you can can live on for a couple of days while it dries, that's a good option. We do have blocking mats at the store. They're the kind that look like puzzle pieces that fit together. And if you've got those, it's great. But what you have to keep in mind is that if you just put together your pieces, lock them all together to make a solid square, it's not going to be 60 inches across. I can pretty much guarantee you it's not going to be 60 inches across. I have a very large blocking mat set, and even mine won't make a 60-inch square. But what you can do, remember, is that you can put these mats around the outside and make an outside ring that's 60 inches across, because you're not going to need to put any pins in the middle of this shawl. We're not pinning the middle out, so that there doesn't have to be blocking mats under the center of the shawl. So that's an option for you. What we are going to be pinning out are these points that are here at the edge of our shawl. So as we worked chart 4, if you remember, chart 4, you were kind of knitting back and forth in zigzags, right? You were increasing and then decreasing. And you were forming these points, which are exactly where you're going to pin your shawl out. And that's what's going to make it actually pretty straightforward to block this, is because we just had these natural points that are already there in your fabric. Now, what you can do is you can take and put an individual pin in each of these points. But there's 56 of them. Remember, you did 56 repeats of the chart 4. So there are 56 of these points, and you can do it, but it will probably be a little slow and a little aggravating to try to block your shawl this way. One tip that we suggest is, if you do not own a set of blocking wires, this is a good time to maybe pick a set up. Blocking wires come in a couple of different flavors or varieties. There are some that are very stiff, that are intended to block straight edges, especially things like sweaters. But there are some that are extremely flexible. They're very thin and they're very flexible. And these are what you're going to want for this shawl, because what you can do is take your blocking wire and put it through all these points on your shawl. And you can put several of them. You can probably put somewhere between 8 and 10 or so on a wire. You just want to make sure that they can be comfortably spaced out and that you've got, several inches of wire sticking out each end so that something doesn't fall off the wire, pop off the wire. But what you can do now is you've got all these points pulled out nicely. You can bend the wire to give you the curvature you need for the shawl. Remember, it's a big circle. And now you only have to put maybe 2 or 3 pins per wire. And that's going to speed the process up tremendously. What you're going to want to do is lay your shawl out on your surface that you're going to block. You want to take the time, take all the wires, get all the points on wires. Like I said, you're going to have several of them around the shawl. And what you're going to do is think about it like a clock. You're going to start at 12 o'clock. And then you're going to 12 o'clock, you're going to kind of pull it up and out so it starts to stretch the fabric out. You're going to make a curve, the natural curve of the shawl. You're going to pin it out and then go across to what would be 6 o'clock. So go to that wire that's directly across from the one you just pinned out. Stretch the fabric, start to stretch the shawl out to about 60 inches across. Take that wire, make that nice curve, pin it. Then go to what would be 3 o'clock. Pull that wire out. Get that curve set, pin it. Then go directly across to what would be 9 o'clock. Get that curve set. And you want to keep working like that across from each other, pulling the shawl out to about a 60-inch diameter. And then once you kind of start to get, those points, you've got, 4 or 6 wires pinned out, you can kind of go around and make small adjustments if you need to get it into that circular shape. But actually a pie shawl like this with a simple border that's got points is truly, in my opinion, more straightforward to block than some other shawl shapes. If you've got funky curves or little picot points that you're trying to block out, this is actually pretty straightforward. You just want to make sure as you're stretching it across, of course, that you are kind of, like I said, working across from each other in sections so you can pull things evenly. You are going to have to stretch it some, obviously, to get the fabric to open up, but the goal is hopefully you should not have to feel like you're stretching it so far that you're worried about breaking your yarn. All right, that was the point. As we increased our needle size as we went out, that was the purpose and why we did it, so that it would make blocking the shawl a lot easier. you wouldn't have to feel like you have to really, really, really stretch it to get it to 60 inches across. And yours may not be quite 60 inches, especially if you chose not to increase your needle size. If you made that deliberate choice because you wanted a slightly smaller shawl, then you're probably not going to get a 60-inch diameter circle. Just kind of work with the fabric. It'll show you how much it wants to open up, all right? But then that's it. And so you're going to leave it to dry. Once you have it all pinned out, leave it, let it dry 100% completely before you unpin it. I think sometimes when people go to block things, they make the mistake at once it's like, well, it's mostly dry, I'll go ahead and unpin it now. Remember, again, wool or wool blend yarns have memory. And so you want them to dry completely so they remember this shape, this open fabric. If you unpin it before it's completely dry, what's going to happen? Potentially it's going to shrink back down a little bit. And so leave it until the fabric's 100% dry. That may take a couple of days depending on, the ambient environment in your home. But once it's 100% dry, take the pins out, take the wires out, and you're all set. And everything is done and you have accomplished a huge project. We hope you're very proud of yourself because you should be. And we hope that you've enjoyed and that you've learned some good skills to put in your knitter's toolbox, not just for making this particular project, but skills that you can apply to other projects as well. That's always our goal with the year-long knit-along. So that's our tips on blocking the Evenstar shawl. And hopefully we will see many of you at our celebration. It'll be in January. People get a chance to come on in or log into Zoom and show us all of your beautiful completed shawls.